It's easy to say that every client, there's two key things they're looking at. How do I get the talent? How do I get it at the best price that I possibly can? How do I reduce co-employment risk and make sure that people are getting paid properly, that they're being managed properly as well? MSP is a managed service program.
Okay.
So that basically means that you are looking to manage the operational aspects of how you acquire, how you engage and manage contingent labor, and then you're engaging subject matter expertise to help you continually optimize the program itself. As the MSP model has evolved over the years, more and more companies have found that if they want to drive stakeholder engagement, it needs to be a facilitator of an optimized program. And that means you manage the communication between the suppliers and maybe your hiring managers along the way.
Managing contingent labour, or a contracted or temporary workforce, presents many challenges for any business. Businesses with complex needs can find themselves dealing with multiple contractor types, suppliers and expertise requirements, which can prove a burden on existing HR functions already dedicated to full-time staff. Managed solutions providers are organisations that support businesses through their extensive talent pools for sourcing and recruitment, specialist advisors for support in planning workforce requirements, and a comprehensive level of support for managing contingent labour on behalf of their clients. But how can businesses determine if an MSP solution is right for them? How can companies identify if MSP is the right way to manage their contingent workforce? And what are the challenges and solutions around implementing an MSP? In this episode of Staffing Strategies Simplified, Andy Tom, VP of Business Development at NES Furcroft, speaks to Steve Dern, Director of Solutions for NES Advantage Solutions. Steve shares his experience and insights into MSP as a service, the difference between MSP and RPO, and how this comprehensive staffing management solution can streamline contingent labour management for businesses with growing and complex needs.
Hello and welcome along to today's podcast on NES Advantage. With me today, Steve Dern, who is our Director for Solutions in the Americas. Welcome along, Steve.
Great to be here, Andy.
Great topic.
Very excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's get into it.
Absolutely. So let's start right at the beginning. What about common pain points in the solution space?
Wow, big loaded question. It's easy to say that every client, there's two key things they're looking at. How do I get the talent? How do I get it at the best price that I possibly can?
Yeah.
That is a story that will live as long as the industry itself does. We deal in the energy and chemical sectors predominantly. And with that, it goes beyond just the pricing and the talent acquisition. There's a lot of regulation that comes with that.
Yeah.
So you've also got to factor in, what are the concerns that I have around making sure that I'm engaging workers or I'm engaging suppliers who are going to be compliant to what the regulatory aspects of our world are going to entail? How do I reduce co-employment risk and make sure that people are getting paid properly, that they're being managed properly as well? It's a very common phrase that we use in this sector called the wild, wild west.
Yeah.
And basically that means we have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
Hiring managers are negotiating with their supply base. What they're negotiating, not sure. Are they under a contract? Is it our contract or is it their contract?
Yeah.
All of those elements come into play. And it really constitutes that the client doesn't have the visibility that they need.
Yeah.
And that is what a managed solution, type of offering, whether we're doing it or somebody else, that's a lot of what those organizations are going to be able to provide. You're going to have cost saving strategies and risk mitigation and compliance, but you're also going to typically be able to put in place some degree of automation through a process automator or a system of record that's going to get you the visibility so that management understands, here's the dollars we're spending.
Yeah.
Here's who we're spending it on.
Yeah.
Here's how well they're performing. Here is who is spending it, when they're spending it, where they're spending it, et cetera. And that information, as it aggregates, gives the client the ability to make educated decisions so that they can continually optimize their program and fine tune it. Because what works today as you launch a program may be completely different from where you're at a year or two from now if you're going through merger and acquisition, rapid growth, things like that.
So there are clients out there who you believe don't have a cost optimized solution, who might not have visibility, who don't have transparency, who don't have the data, who don't have control, and that's who we're looking to help.
Absolutely.
So how do we help them? MSP, what is MSP?
So that basically means that you are looking to manage the operational aspects of how you acquire, how you engage and manage contingent labor, and then you're engaging subject matter expertise to help you continually optimize the program itself.
So is there a technology component to this?
Typically, yes. So in the world of acronyms, VMS is Vendor Management System. And that is essentially what's going to serve as the infrastructure or the system of record for a contingent workforce program, which may be managed by an MSP provider. What it's going to do is it allows for the automation of process flows, typically configured to the client's needs, their business rules, etc. So the rules they may have for one part of the organization may be the same, or they may be different for another part of the organization. So those configurations get set up in implementation. You can put all your job descriptions and titles in there, rate structures and strategies. All of these things can be configured in the VMS. So it essentially is serving as the infrastructure. However, everything that goes through the VMS becomes reportable. And that is where the program office, whether it's internally managed by a client or through a third-party MSP provider, those people act as the brains of the program. And they're going to take that information, look at it, analyze it, and figure out where do we have problems at today based on the trends we're seeing. Do we have turnover issues? Do we have issues with suppliers not supporting the program? What kind of performance do we get from the suppliers and bottlenecks in the system? All of these things can be tracked in a VMS typically. So it plays a very important part in that regard.
So this varies greatly from a traditional recruitment model.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And how has it evolved? How has the solution space evolved over 10, 15 year period?
Well, in my time frame, it's evolved over 22 years. But the MSP model, back when I started years ago with a major utility client, we were very much looked at, okay, let's get the process, let's get it centralized, but you're also a policing agent. There is still some of that exists out there today. But I think as the MSP model has evolved over the years, more and more companies have found that if they want to drive stakeholder engagement, not only by the hiring managers, but by the suppliers who are valuable to them, it can't just be a policing agent. It needs to be a facilitator of an optimized program. And that means you manage the communication between the suppliers and maybe your hiring managers along the way. So that's one of the biggest changes. Other changes, you've got new technology. I mean, you and I both know Apple's coming out with a new cell phone version. Seems like every 9 months nowadays. We're seeing technology play a bigger role. There are more options than ever on the VMS front. In recent years, you've had direct sourcing technologies come into where they'll help the organization build out customized talent pools based on the key roles that they recruit for, whether it's a unique skill set, whether it is an evergreen skill set that is constantly being sourced. So that technology is in play. There's other platforms, other solution types of providers that are out there as well, where technology is a big play. So one of the advantages I've had in the marketplace in my career is I've overseen a lot of different programs, different sectors, most in the energy sector, but I've seen different solutions get implemented, seen them fail, seen them succeed, but I've always been evaluating the technology side of the world pretty consistently.
Yeah. And another acronym that we hear a lot is RPO. How does the solution side differ from an RPO?
So RPO, as opposed to being focused on temporary labor, it's more positioned for direct hire recruitment needs. Yeah. So RPO is a recruitment process outsourcing. And in large elements, it frequently is used where there is either a gap of in-house recruiting expertise, maybe for a certain new initiative that is going on, or there's critical bandwidth issues. Maybe there's a project that is going on that they've suddenly got to hire 100 people for in the next 2 months. Typically, a recruiting organization is going to have a tough time scaling to that kind of a high volume need for professional and technical skill sets. Yeah. That's where an RPO is frequently going to be engaged.
So we've looked at the pain points. We've looked at what an MSP is, an RPO is. Which companies can we help? I mean, who out there? What companies should we engage with in terms of adding value?
Great question. For our perspective, there's really not much of a limitation on it. Yeah. Typically, if you're talking about an MSP program, most companies will start paying attention to that and wanting to address some of the challenges they might have once they hit maybe about the $10 million mark.
$10 million in contingent spend.
Correct. Yeah. $10 million annual spend on contingent or temporary labor. It could be sooner than that. But usually at that point, you're starting to build up enough scale. You're starting to get hiring managers saying, I need this supplier. Yeah. But you aren't sure what the justification is, or you're not sure how well the supply base is performing, et cetera. And it's becoming more and more a part of your total talent management strategy that you're relying on. Yeah. So you need to get that visibility. You need to get that process control and scalability along with it.
Yeah. And we touched on some of the benefits earlier, but what do you think are the real key benefits to these companies of going down the solutions path?
Well, to me, it typically ties into 6 key things. I've yet to meet an organization that isn't interested in cost savings or cost avoidance. Yeah. We used to say savings all the time, and depending on the labor markets and where you're at, sometimes it's cost avoidance. Yeah. But having someone who can partner, who has a feel for the marketplace nationwide, specifically from a contingent staffing perspective, as opposed to your permanent traditional hire perspective, that's invaluable. Yeah. And we also know the supply base around it and all of that. Compliance and risk mitigation, obviously, we spoke to as well. Performance management and total quality of the program. Knowing how well your program is running. Knowing where there's bottlenecks. Knowing where you need to make adjustments in terms of how workers are managing those third-party labor suppliers along the way. Another element, which we touched on a little bit, is visibility. Executive management wants to know where their dollars are being spent, so on and so forth, and how effective that is, and knowing who it's being spent with. Yeah. Because eventually, over time, as you look at all of that data, you're able to make smart decisions based on facts, based on evidence that is captured through those systems of record, to be able to say, I want to take my supply base, say, from 50 firms down to 15 firms. Yeah. How do you do that? How do you justify that? Yeah. So we can help tremendously in terms of the visibility that goes into that. And then taking supplier management a step further, who are the right suppliers, for the mix of business that you have, the geographies that you're in, the types of skill sets that you have, the contractual terms that might be required by the buyer organization, who's going to be the end recipient of those services. The last thing that I always think is underestimated, and particularly by what I'll call Gen Zero companies who don't have a program in place. Yeah. They're going through the wild, wild west. Yeah. Don't underestimate the importance of the user experience. Of course. Because you can build out on paper the best program imaginable. You can think, oh, there's 20 cost levers, but here are the 8 to 10 that we really think are going to generate the most savings. Here's policies we want to do. Here's the best supply mix and all of that. But if the user experience isn't good, you don't have the technology to automate things effectively, you don't have the evidence to make your decisions, and you don't have a good service model, your stakeholders aren't going to use your program.
You need the buy-in.
You've got to have that buy-in.
Yeah.
And I've seen too many firms take the shortcut on that, not worry about that user experience. And what they thought was a $50 million program suddenly is a $10 million program with a lot of maverick spend.
Yeah.
And that maverick spend means non-compliance, additional cost layers involved, et cetera. They don't maximize the value.
You don't get the benefit that you're looking for.
Bingo.
So looking forward, so we decide we want to go down a solutions route. Talk to me about implementation. How does the process work from start to finish? I reach out, we engage, and then what happens then?
So from an implementation perspective, once the contracts are done, the selection has been made. Typical implementation process is usually broken into generically about 6 categories. You've got your pre-kickoff work activity. Then you've got your discovery sessions. And the MSP and the VMS typically will have project management teams for the implementation that'll be deployed to work with the client and what I'll call their governance team.
Yeah.
So this will be their project manager, probably a program sponsor. It could be the same person.
Yeah.
But you've usually got finance and accounting involved. You've got IT involved. You've got key hiring managers involved, legal, HR, sometimes even communications along the way. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that all the stakeholders internally have their voice at the table. They have subject matter expertise in terms of how this can be rolled out because they're going to know their culture the best.
Yeah.
They know their own business rules and regulations better than the MSP and the VMS typically do. So that'll be the kickoff period. And then you're getting into discovery workshops.
Yeah.
So you've got workshops on finance and accounting so that we know how do we structure an invoice? How does that file get submitted? What are the remittance processes and terms involved? You've got IT for integrations that need to occur, security protocols that need to be investigated. HR and legal are usually involved in a lot of the workforce engagement processes. So how do we engage with suppliers? How should managers engage with the workers, et cetera, to make sure that they're avoiding, worker misclassification or co-employment risk.
Yeah.
So all of that goes into essentially a statement of work that is going to be signed off on. And this gets developed based on those workshops so that we can present it to the client and say, this is what you want us to build. They look at it. Eventually they say, yes, this is how we want it done. Very well. And then from there, the VMS is configured, design, integration, setup, et cetera. And it goes through testing, which the client is usually involved in a little bit based on user role definition. And then from there, the MSP is developing training. And in our programs, it's important to note the training goes beyond just here's how you do something in the technology. We want to talk about the program as a whole. What are the goals behind it? And what are the rules of engagement that are going to be expected? What are key contract terms that hiring managers should be aware of so that they are working smartly with the MSP player in the program?
Yeah.
Once it goes live, the first few weeks are usually a little crazy, but we've got a hypercare period as well, kind of as that final phase to make sure that any kinks in the armor get worked out. There's usually not too many. But every once in a while,
of course,
here and there.
Of course. So the design phase, maximizing efficiency, and then the implementation phase, minimizing any sort of business disruption. Is that fair?
Exactly. We want to have as few headaches for the stakeholders as possible,
and drive that value. So what about examples? Do you have any examples that we can talk about? Obviously, we can't talk about the individual companies,
sure.
But what sort of examples can we look at?
Well, one of the best examples I have is of a Gen Zero program that selected my organization as an MSP. And when we went in there, it was the wild, wild west for sure. They did not have a whole lot of data. They didn't know who all their suppliers were. They gave us a list of about 30 to start with. We got them under contract. We got them loaded into the system with their incumbent workers and all of that. But as time went on, they discovered, as they would speak with different managers, well, wait a minute, we forgot this firm. We forgot that firm. So the goal wasn't necessarily to engage the firms right up front and ask for mass cost savings and just race to the bottom line. It was to get visibility of what reality was.
Yeah.
So they did that. In the end, they had over 65 firms that came into the program. So we got them in. We started to measure their productivity. And as an MSP, we would counsel them, if you're struggling with something, here's what the good performers are doing, or here's a revised tutorial on how to do this.
When you say work with them, you're working with the supply base here, not the end client.
The MSP, both. But it included the supply base because we want them to succeed.
Yeah.
The client's not going to be happy if they're not getting the right talent when they need it.
Yeah.
So you need that total network of your supply base, however big it is. So the first step was to get the visibility. From there, they realized, okay, we've got X number of firms who really aren't doing a whole lot.
Yeah.
Or they're not performing or they're not engaging. So that 65 supply base went down to somewhere in the mid-20s within about a year.
And would you say that's normal? Is that
that's
normally you would take
that's fairly normal.
Yeah.
That's fairly normal. Beyond that, you then looked at a critical area where they wanted to look at cost savings more specifically and strategically. So you went through a formal sourcing process, and that list of 25 suppliers came down to about 13. And those were all considered to be tier one suppliers for their respective skill sets. There were prime firms in place for part of the business. There was a vendor neutral portion of the business as well for other parts. You can have both under a consistent MSP model structure.
So under that example, initially they wanted visibility. They didn't really know what was going out there. Once they had visibility, they wanted control.
Yep.
And once they had control, they wanted to deliver cost optimization.
Yeah, and the cost optimization, you saw markups drop anywhere from 7 to 40%.
Because you're driving that efficiency.
And you had the visibility.
Yeah. So the data analytics drives your good business decisions going forward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Steve, fantastic. Really enjoyed it. Very, very insightful.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And we'll see you next time.
Can't wait.
This has been Staffing Strategies Simplified with Andy Tom, VP of Business Development at NES Furcroft, and Steve Dern, Director of Solutions for NES Advantage. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast and the insights into MSP as an effective way to hire, retain and manage contingent and contract labour. If you'd like to learn more about how NES Advantage solutions can support your organisation in driving continuous improvement through streamlined staffing services, or have any questions, why not reach out to us on our website at www.nesadvantage.com or via our social media channels.